Good afternoon, everyone. We will get started shortly. We want to give everybody an opportunity to come into this webinar, the Black Girls' Experiences with Bullying and Sexual Harassment. So we'll be starting in the next few minutes. Thank you for coming. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kathy Elliott, and I'm the CEO of Gwen's Girls, we are also the convener of the Black Girls Equity Alliance. And so I wanted to just take time to say thank you for those that that are tuning in, as well as thank you to our panelists who you will get to see and hear shortly. We have an action-packed 2-hour webinar, and we want to go ahead and get started. First, I want to introduce my co-facilitator, Tashara. She's gonna come on screen.
Everyone.
So as you see, we both have leopard on. We did our leopard print. We did not coordinate, but when we both saw each other on camera, it was like, okay, we're thinking alike. So thank you, Tashara, for being here with me. This is our 3rd webinar, and we have one more to go in September, and we'll give you all information about that one, but we are so excited about what we're gonna talk about today. I wanted to just give some housekeeping types of instructions. You will see shortly that this is being closed captioned, and so those of you who are needing the closed caption services, you will see shortly in the chat box a link that you can be able to click on to be able to see that information. And I think that is it for that for right now. Tashara will give some other updates whenever we stop sharing our screen, such as if you have questions, you can type them in directly to the chat box, although there is also a link down at the bottom where it says Q&A. You can type your questions in that space as well. So I wanted to also start by saying thank you to our sponsors who have given us grants to support this initiative, the Gwendolyn J. Elliott Institute Speakers Bureau Workshop Series. And that would be FISA Foundation, Opportunity Fund, and the Hines Endowment. So thank you very much for your continued support. So I wanted to just go ahead, as I said, and just get started and just give some background about Gwen's Girls, as well as the work that we're doing within the Black Girls Equity Alliance. And so Gwen's Girls was founded in 2002 by my mother, the late Commander Gwen Elliott, and we've been doing programming here in the Pittsburgh area since then, focusing on girls, and in particular Black girls, because that's the population that tends to be in the communities that we're in. We provide after-school programming, in-school support, but then also most recently we added our research and evaluation department, the Gwendolyn J. Elliott Institute. And within that institute, we have community volunteers and experts that have done research around issues that impact Black girls, and most of them are within the universities that we are fortunate to have in our area, as well as systems leaders, so administrators from the juvenile justice, the child welfare system, as well as some of the school systems. And so it has been an absolute pleasure working with these individuals to start to just address the issues that are impacting Black girls here in our region. And so, as I said earlier, this is the third of our 4 webinars that's leading up to our 5th annual Equity Summit, which we will also give information about. So Black girls' experiences with bullying and sexual harassment, I wanted to give some background into how we got to talking about this issue. So approximately now 2 years ago, within the Black Girls Equity Alliance, we have 4 actual work groups. So it's the juvenile justice, the child welfare, education, and health and wellness. And within the health and wellness work group, we have started to look at safety and what does safety mean to our girls. And in particular, it was around a time where schools were talking about, you know, more metal detectors and, you know, more police in schools. And so we wanted to have a conversation with the girls to see what they felt and see, you know, what does safety mean to them, and did in fact having more officers in the school make them feel safe. And we held about 3 different listening sessions, and throughout these sessions, one of the main things that happened was we started talking about school safety, but within like 10-15 minutes, the conversation shifted a bit to focusing on just how they felt unsafe when it came to being frisked or going through metal detectors, or even just a conversation around their bodies, and some of our girls being suspended or having to put a different pair of pants or change their shirt because it was seen to be too provocative in the school setting. And so that led to further conversation about like what's their definition, or what do they feel is sexual harassment? Because I think oftentimes when we're having these conversations, and this was actually months before the Me Too movement had got into the you know, the wide range of publicity that came from that, and people within the different sectors was, you know, kind of exploring what does sexual harassment mean, or, you know, this phrase around Me Too. And a lot of people fail to look at just what's happening to young girls, and that the fact, even in talking to adults, oftentimes, you know, people can think back about, you know, when did they first have their experience of somebody, you know, making lewd comments about them and their bodies, or, you know, being touched inappropriately. And oftentimes it wasn't just in their work environment, it was in a school setting, and sometimes in a very young age school setting, like 2nd and 3rd grade. And so one of the things that was kind of shocking for me was, this space where it's become an acceptable type of behavior. So for instance, a girl, talked about, having reported these issues to an adult, someone that's supposed to, keep them safe. And oftentimes it's like, well, move your chair over there. We're going to move your seat. Or he just likes you. He's, just, playful. Like, don't pay him no attention, but really not addressing the behavior. So what that did with many girls and women that we talked to was set like this expectation that no one is actually going to do anything. So why should I even bring it up or speak up? And so that's what we're going to talk about today, because it's unacceptable for a child or any person, because we do focus and talk a lot about women and girls being sexually harassed or bullied, but we know that it happens to many different people that are in different sectors. And so we want to make sure that we do have a comprehensive conversation, but we also want to focus in on, we know that specifically Black girls' experience has been that, no, even if they speak up, their voice doesn't mean anything. So I just wanted to set the context of like how we started to have this conversation. And then within the Black Girls Equity Alliance, the Health and Wellness Work Group actually did a study. And so Dr. Brinkman will go over some of the information that was gathered in that. And then Julie Evans and Sue Frietsche and Shiwali Patel will also give some insight as to what we're seeing locally, but also nationally. And what are some of the issues that some of the issues that we're seeing, but then what are some of the solutions? How, as adults, can we address this? And then how, as the youth that are, part of this conversation, but also maybe watching, what are some of the things that they can do to help to address this? So before we get started, I also want to just give a shout out to Southwest PA Says No More, one of our partners in this and putting this series together. And they also had been a part of the conversation early on when we were having the girls and these listening sessions. And a video shoot was done, and I want to show you a clip that was developed that highlights some of the issues from the girls' perspective that were shared. So Tashara, if you can go ahead and show the video, and then after that we will hear from some of our young partners who are here to kind of share their insight to this issue.
Because I know that somebody's going to be there saying something to me.
I think sexual harassment happens to a lot of people, but usually it's just like the little stuff that's really normalized.
For the most part, I see this happening at school in hallways whenever classes are switching. You can see incidences of verbally harassing people, like catcalling people.
People grope each other, touch people when they're unwanted.
Unwanted touching. And then there's also, some through social media. They get picked on over social media, then it gets brought to school.
Certain things that get said to girls based on what they're wearing.
Whores, sluts, hoes, foul language.
It's a source of anxiety. It's a source of stress. And it may not seem like a big deal, but maybe that girl has to think about that every single time she steps into the school. We're not just victims, and we're going to get stronger. We're going to be stronger and show everybody that this isn't okay.
Okay, thank you, Tashara. So I would like to invite our young panelists to join us. And Tashara, Shire, if you could go to the next slide, please. So we have two of our participants that are involved in our Black Girls Advocacy and Leadership Alliance. First is Emmanazia, and as you see, Emmanazia is driven by opportunities to support the Black community. She has aspirations of building wealth in her community and plans to become an entrepreneur. So welcome, Emmanazia. Glad to have you. And next we have Diajane Diggs, as I affectionately call Aja, and she is a secondary education major at CCAC and outreach coordinator of Black Young and Educated. As part of today's Black youth and sisterhood, she believes their voice deserves to be heard and makes a difference. She is a former Gwen's Girls Bagala member and feels her participation provided multiple opportunities, including a voice to speak out about the racial and sexist hardships Black women face in everyday life. So welcome, ladies. How are you all doing today?
I'm pretty well. I feel good.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Aja, how are you today? Okay. So I just wanted to start the conversation off with you all because oftentimes we as adults have these conversations and don't take into consideration the young people who are impacted the most. And so you got an opportunity to see the clip, and Aja was one of the participants that was involved in this, a photo shoot and a video shoot. So can you all give me some insight to what you're thinking and feeling after watching the video? Any additional thoughts or anything that stuck out to you based on what people shared in that clip?
I honestly do agree with it, but like sometimes it's not only like, sometimes it's not only like the guys, it's the girls too, because like, girls are like touchy-feely too. And I don't want to be touched by any of them. Like I don't want any of all of that. Like, that's just how I feel.
Right.
I agree with her.
As for me, it was like shocking seeing how young I was back then in the video. After watching it once again, I got reminded that it's really great it's really informative as well, and it shows it shows faces and actual people and children who like go through like these type of things, and it actually shows how important it is to like pay attention to like youth and everything, and also show like these sexual harassment isn't just like, it doesn't just happen to like one specific set of like person, it happens to everyone. And so having diversity within that video shows importance and how different people experience these type of things and whatnot.
Right. So I know, Aja, you are now in college, and Emmanazia, you're still in high school. Can you talk about some of the things, not only just what you see happening in your school, but is there any process or way, if something happens, that if it's reported, that your school responds? What has your experience been with your school response?
For me, in school, they'll mostly say, okay, keep your hands off each other or get out of the classroom or something like that. And it's alright, it's kind of helpful, something like that. Because, like, I still see this person after school. I still see them in the hallways, transitions and stuff. So it's like, okay, what do you want to do with that? Like, is there another alternative? Is there somewhere else to turn to? But for me, if it's not sexual harassment, then it's body shaming. Like, it's like.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? What do you mean body shaming?
Okay, so like, if they're not touching you in specifics, then they'll say something like, oh, you got a nasty butt anyways, or oh, you got a nasty butt anyways, or oh, you're fat anyways. Like, something just to bring you down. Like, it's something that, like, affects you mentally, because it's like, what if you never thought about it? What if you never thought, much about it or anything of it? And for this person to bring it up, you're going to be self-conscious about it more now.
Right. What about you, Aja? Having experience in high school as well as now on a college campus, how's that been for you?
Ever since preschool, I've always been going to PPS schools my entire life. I even experienced sexual harassment as young as 5 years old in kindergarten. I was walking past my desk and a guy behind me squeezed my butt. I told him, of course, but the teacher was just like, oh, just write him up. You didn't sit out the classroom. You didn't call the vice principal or anyone else to come up and take him out the classroom. You didn't even tell me if I was okay. You didn't ask. I remember just back then, feeling scared and ashamed in kindergarten. And I feel like a child should not feel that way. Also, within high school, I went to Kaplan High School. I graduated last year. I remember coming in during my senior year and I would wear a tube top, and I was sent home for that because my shoulders were out and they were sexualizing my body. You don't look right. But then a girl with a more average body type that was wearing the same tube top as me, she got to wear that all day in class. She got to stay in school. I was sent home. She was just wearing a tube top. I was being sexualized by the faculty members. And I felt that was a shame, honestly. We don't even know, I don't know, people know now, we don't even know who our Title IX coordinator was within PPS. And I felt like I was also informed that we only had one Title IX coordinator. Things may have changed now, but back then in high school, we didn't even know who to go to when we got sexually harassed. And if we told on someone, or if we brought something up, it was pushed back, it was swept underneath the rug. My parents weren't called, my parents weren't involved. It was just unorganized and disrespectful to me, and also the victims that went through sexual harassment in school as well. As for college, I'm not gonna lie, I got sexually assaulted in college last year, and I had to come back home because, one, the faculty members would not listen to me. I also have a chronic illness and I had accommodations. So I feel like if you're not gonna listen to me in my accommodations for my, learning disability, what makes me think you're gonna listen to me, right? So they weren't listening to me about that. I kept reaching out for resources. People weren't giving me resources. And I became frustrated and mentally drained, honestly, and to the point where I had to drop out and come back home. And when I look back at that, I still go through the trauma, and honestly, sorry, I'm just give me a second. Whew. I honestly I still have go through symptoms of trauma. Sometimes I can't sleep at night. Sometimes I have nightmares about it. I don't feel confident in my body that much anymore. And I catch myself wondering, did I do something? Why me? And I also catch myself being self-critical as well, because I feel like if I drop out of college, am I even worth anything? Why did I let this one thing take me out of college? But it's gonna affect me through everyday life. I can't work, I can't study well, I can't even hug my dad or my uncles without, feeling some type of way. And I feel like education systems need to do better. Faculty staff needs to do better. You can give them all the training you want, but we need to hire more faculty members with non-biases. We need to hire more people who actually care about their career and actually care about the students and children's well-beings, and not just someone who wants a paycheck. And we need to spread awareness about these kids. There's too many Black girls and women having their mental illnesses and reaching out for help, and no one's listening to them. No one's reaching out to these girls. There has to be a change. And that's just how I feel about that. So.
Thank you for sharing that, Aja, and even sharing some of your personal experience, because that does give us, the better insight on how we can do better by our girls and our women, and especially within the school setting. So is there anything else that you all want to share before we shift into, you know, kind of taking a little deeper dive into some of the data? We don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but we do want to set the context of, you know, what we know is happening. As you talked about, you know, there are many girls and women that experience this, and many don't come, you know, are courageous enough, or even feel, and I don't even want to put it on them to them being courageous, but even feel safe enough to be able to speak up and to get help, or to even address a particular perpetrator or whatever. So is there anything that you all want to say that we can, as adults and those working within the systems and people that are on this webinar today, can do to do better by young people?
I just have to say, listen to the youth more. Listen to us more. We know you have more experience, but people don't have an idea of what the youth really wants until you talk to the youth. Like you said, like, get some ideas from these kids, because they know more than you do, you know? They know more than the adult. These are different generations. So listen to the youth more, reach out more. Have kids be on board, and don't just grab the privilege, no. Grab children from each and every, you know, different neighborhood and whatnot, because we have a voice, we have concerns, we feel like we're not being heard. So please listen out and reach out more. That's all I have to say, honestly, and thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask you two to be co-facilitators with me and Tashira as these next few speakers and panelists give their information. If there's anything that you all hear that you want to speak up on or want to give insight to, please don't hesitate to do so, okay? So next we have Dr. Britney Brinkman. She is, let me move myself out of the way. I got my screen up and read her bio. She is an associate professor of psychology at Point Park University and owner of BGB Consulting, a consulting firm for nonprofit organizations and schools. She is the program director for the PsyD program in clinical psychology at Point Park University, where she leads the social justice psychology research team. Dr. Brinkman is on the advisory board for the Gwendolyn J. Elliott Institute at Gwen's Girls and co-convener of the Health and Wellness Work Group of the Black Girls Equity Alliance. So Dr. Brinkman, Britney, thank you for being with us today. And so please enlighten us with an update on the work that you've been doing, especially with the Black Girls Equity Alliance and the Health and Wellness Work Group.
Yeah, so first I just want to say good afternoon, and I'm really glad to be here and be part of this. And thank you so much to Aja and Emmanazia for sharing your experiences and just being honest about what you've been through and how often you have been unheard from adults like me who are researchers and white people in positions of power. So I really appreciate you all being here and helping us set the tone for this. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about some of the data we've collected locally to help us understand what's happening for Black girls in our region. And as Dr. Kathy started out talking a little bit about how we got here from as part of the Black Girls Equity Alliance, it really came from talking to young women about thinking we needed to really talk about safety in schools, focused on police officers. We need to keep having that conversation, but a lot of conversations about sexual harassment that came up, and realizing that we needed to do something about that as well. So we've done some advocacy work as a group, and one of the things we decided to do was develop a study to better understand what was happening. And I'm one of the members of the group. It really was a group project, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the methods because I think they were really important in particularly how we centered young Black women's experiences in the process too. So this was really designed to be a collaborative, community-based participatory action research project. So I started out with listening groups with groups of Black girls to talk about their experiences, and then we had them look at the rough draft of the survey we put together to tell us before we even put it out there, are we asking the right questions? Are we wording things in a way that makes sense to y'all? What are we missing? How do we make this really a useful study? So that was a really, really important part of the process before we even started collecting data. And I wanted to note in particular that the FISA Foundation helped to fund this project. So next slide, please. We had 131 participants completed this survey online anonymously, and about 25% of those reported that they had an IEP. They came from all different school types. The majority of them came from public schools, but we did have students from all different types of schools. And we collected intentionally in the southwestern PA area because we really wanted to get a sense of our region. So a lot of students from Pittsburgh, but not exclusively. So next slide, please. The majority of the participants were white, about 33% identified as Black or African American or African or biracial, and about 11% identified as a different category of people of color, so Latina, Asian American, some Native American students as well. And then a range of grades, here you can see sexual orientation, gender identity. So about 21% identified as bisexual, 2% as lesbian, 6% as queer, and then 17% were unsure at this time. And then gender identity, we exclusively were focusing on girls, but we included it, think about girls inclusively. So anyone who identifies as a girl or female identified, transgender, or non-binary. Next slide, please. So I'm going to just share the data from the Black girls in our study because I really want to center their experiences in our conversation today. So this first slide includes their experiences of sexual harassment in person in school. So we asked girls if they'd ever experienced sexual harassment, and then we gave them a checklist. We know with young people and adults that if you ask someone if they've experienced sexual harassment, a lot of people say no. And then if you ask them, have you experienced any of these things? Then they say, oh yeah, I've experienced that. So there's often a gap between our understanding of what sexual harassment is or our own process of labeling the experience. So there's a lot of reasons for that. So it's really important to dig into these specific types of experiences. So what we found was really similar to the literature across the United States and other countries as well, of the kinds of experiences that are happening in schools. So 42% of the Black girls in our study said that during that school year, they'd experienced unwanted sexual comments, jokes, or gestures at least once. So all of this is at least once, if not more than once. Being called gay in a negative way, 25%. That someone touched you in an unwelcome way, 27% of our girls said that happened to them that year. So also might have happened other years as well. That someone flashed or exposed themselves to you, 16%. Being physically intimidated by someone, 25%. Okay, 25% of the girls said somebody that year in their school physically intimidated them. 4% said someone had pulled off their clothes, and 4% reported someone had actually forced them to do something sexual. So I want us to take a breath because I think there are probably a lot of female identified people on this call who've experienced a lot of these things, and we start to normalize it as well. But just to recognize that there's a lot of girls who are experiencing things that they shouldn't have to experience in school. So next slide, please. We also asked girls about their experiences of sexual harassment online, which is really, really important all the time, and especially now. I'm really concerned that as we move to online learning, that schools are going to neglect sexual harassment even more than they were and think, well, we don't need to worry about this if students are in person. But we know that even when students are interacting in person, they are also interacting online with each other, and sexual harassment is happening. So this was data before we were in a pandemic. When students were interacting in person, we saw this much experiences of sexual harassment online. So 38% of the girls said they'd experienced unwanted sexual comments, jokes, or gestures online. 25% were called gay in a negative way. 22% said someone had spread sexual rumors about them, and 11% said that someone had shared sexual pictures that they hadn't agreed, they didn't want to receive. Next slide, please. So one thing that's really important, I think we sometimes miss in this conversation about sexual harassment, is around dress codes. And Emmanazia and Aja both mentioned this, and the girls we talked to in the focus groups have talked about this, and really how important this connection is in understanding the way that schools are creating and reinforcing rape culture and objectifying girls' bodies, and particularly girls of color. So we know that when we look at dress codes around the country and around the world, that girls are dress coded more often than boys, and that girls of color are dress coded the most. And what that means really is an adult looking at your body and telling you that you look too sexual, right? So it is an adult sexualizing a girl's body and then punishing them for their choice to sexualize that girl. So, and it does start at really young ages, and the consequences include just the fact that now an adult has told you they're sexualizing your body, right? Which can lead someone to feeling anxious and distressed and distracted and unsafe. Girls are sometimes forced to wear other clothing on top of the clothes they were already wearing. They're sent to in-school suspension, which I think we are not tracking as much as it is happening. So they are missing school because somebody has decided that the way they're dressed is distracting to somebody else, or they are sent home from school, right? So our girls are missing their chance to be educated because adults in these systems think that it's their job to sexualize girls' bodies. So we thought it was really important to ask about this as we were talking about sexual harassment. And in this study, some of the girls said that they hadn't been dress coded, but part of what I think is really important about this data is that some girls are being dress coded a lot, right? 10 or more times in a year. So that's 10 or more times a girl has been sent to suspension, sent home, forced to wear like the ugly things they make you put on your body, or just having, again, an adult person who's supposed to be somebody who's safe in the school environment telling you that they are sexualizing your body and that it's your problem, right? So next slide, please. We know from the literature about sexual harassment that people respond in a lot of different ways, that they try to figure out what to do in the moment. There's a lot of contextual variables that impact how a person responds to experiences of sexual harassment. So we wanted to ask the girls in our study what kinds of things they had done. So this is like, have you ever done this? So some girls have tried multiple different strategies at different times, depending on the situation. And you can see there's a big range of responses. So some girls said, I didn't do anything. And sometimes doing nothing it happened so fast, I didn't have time to do anything. I was so shocked, I didn't even know what to say or do. Sometimes this has happened to me so many times before, why would I do something now? Nothing's been very productive. 33% said that they ignored it or they tried to ignore it. And you'll see in a minute that that's often what they're told to do, right? So at this point, a lot of our girls were in high school. So they've probably experienced sexual harassment before, been told to ignore it. And now we're like, well, I guess I'm just trying to ignore it, right? So this is a strategy that girls are trying to use to just like keep going with their day. Girls also try to defend themselves. They tell the person to stop. They ask for help. Sometimes they'll try to turn it into a joke, and we see this with adults and college students as well. It's like a way to try to change the situation, right? So if I feel unsafe and I want to kind of get out of the situation without it escalating, then I might try to like, okay, let's sort of joke around about this so I can just like get away from you or get you to leave me alone. And we know sometimes when girls and women push back or speak up about experiences of sexual harassment, that things do escalate, right? So sometimes just trying to like, how do I just get out of this situation? People might sort of make something, I'll just kind of make it a joke so I can get away. Next slide, please. So this is really, really important to understand that even though these experiences are pervasive, that doesn't mean that they aren't harmful, that they have an impact on girls and their experiences in school. This first set of impacts, there's 2 slides. You can see all of the ways that sexual harassment negatively impacts girls. This first set is particularly related to experiences in school. So when we talk about push out and we talk about the ways that Black girls are being pushed out of school, part of it is related to sexual harassment. Experiencing sexual harassment and having it not responded to appropriately. Asking for help, not getting the support that one needs, and then not feeling safe in school or not wanting to be at school. So we see here 31% of the girls said it was hard to study as a result of sexual harassment. 24% want to stay home. Why do you want to go to a place where you don't feel safe? 34% didn't want to go to school. 29% changed the way they went to school, that they were being sexually harassed on their commute. And sometimes that means a girl ends up being late to school and then they get suspended for that. And it creates these like other ripple effects. 20% of Black girls in our study got in trouble because they were experiencing sexual harassment at school. Okay, so I'm going to say that again. 20% of the Black girls, they got in trouble for experiencing sexual harassment, right? We have to change this. 18% are switching schools or classes, right? And we know, I think Sue will probably talk about this, but the person experiencing the harassment should not be the person having to change what's happening in their situation, change their seat, change their class, change school. But we're seeing that girls that is what's happening, either because that's the only option they're given by the school, or they just decide, I can't be in this space anymore. I'm not gonna be here. Next slide, please. We also know there are a lot of impacts of experiencing sexual harassment on one's health, physical and mental and emotional health. So 47%, almost half of the girls in our study said that they felt fearful or anxious because of their experiences of sexual harassment. 39% experienced symptoms like stomach aches and body aches, just like feeling not good in your body. A lot had trouble sleeping or felt shame. And then some said that they stopped doing some activity or sport where they had been experiencing sexual harassment. They just stopped going to get away from the stressful experience. Next slide, please. So we know with youth and adults and college students, when they experience sexual harassment, oftentimes they don't tell people about it. Again, if you start experiencing sexual harassment, Aja talks about experiencing sexual harassment when she was 5 and telling people and not getting a useful response, right? So sometimes we just start to learn, is it worth talking to anybody about, right? So by the time you're in high school, are you gonna even tell anybody? So we wanted to know, are the girls telling anybody, and who are they telling, right? So 20% said they didn't tell anyone. 33% are telling friends. So I think this is also really important to recognize that we are creating a situation where girls, and maybe it's not all girls, right, but youth are being asked to support each other, right? Like, this happens to you, there's not an adult in your school that you feel like is gonna do anything about it, so you lean on your friends. 9% did tell a teacher, a guidance counselor, or another adult in the school, and 20% did tell a parent or family member, which I think is also really important, that they are reaching out for help, and so we're making sure that we are supporting family members to know what to do, right? So if someone in your family tells you they're experiencing sexual harassment at school, how can you support them and help them? And then 4% said that they'd actually told the police, which we expect to be low. So next slide. And then I sigh because I think this was an unsurprising but still depressing slide, which was, what did adults do? So if you did tell an adult, what did they do about it? And actually, Sue, who's going to be talking, is the reason that one of these is on here, because I had not even considered it as a possibility, which is why we do things as teams and not individually, because I hadn't even thought to put on there, I was told about my rights and it was treated appropriately. My experience with this topic has been that was so uncommon, I've like forgot to have it on the survey. So thankfully Sue pointed out to me, so which is good that there is 16% of the girls said somebody did help them. They told them, this is what's going on for you, this is how it helped you. But an equal amount of adults said, he just likes you, right? So we've started having this conversation already today, that this is the narrative, that a girl tells somebody, a boy is sexually harassing me, and the adult says, well, he likes you, right? Like it's the normal way to respond. Girls get in trouble, they are not believed. They've been told, you should keep this confidential and not tell anybody else about it, to protect the person that's doing the behavior. They're frequently told to ignore the experience and just like move on from it.
Brittany, can I jump in and ask a quick question?
Please do.
For this question in particular, were the girls allowed to check more than one box? Because I'm wondering, for example, someone being blamed, they can also be told about their rights. So the things don't seem to be mutually exclusive.
Yes, they were allowed to check more than one box. And it also sort of allowed that there might have been different experiences and different responses. So so it might be that one time they told somebody and they were blamed, but some other experience they told somebody and they supported them, or they told one person. Typically, if the first adult you go to blames you and tells you to ignore it and doesn't support you in your rights, you might not go to the next adult, right? But yeah, sometimes there's mixed messages happening. So it's definitely not like only one of these things might have happened to you, but just, you know, did these things happen?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, so what do we do? I think I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is what we're doing for most of the rest of the webinar today, but I wanted to make sure that I noted some important recommendations, and then I'm happy to take questions now or later. But we need age-appropriate, culturally informed, comprehensive sexuality and relationship education in school, starting in kindergarten, for everybody, for the kids, for the adults, right? We need to address that this is a climate problem, right? That we have a culture that sexualizes women, and we have school cultures that also sexualize women and girls starting at a young age. And we really need to be thinking about this as part of a lifelong education process around sexuality and relationships, right? That if we're not teaching boys, and boys aren't the only ones that do this, but they commit more sexual harassment than girls do, but if we're not teaching them not to do it, then how do we expect it to ever change? I think we need to get rid of dress codes. I'm on the no dress code is the right way to go. But if we are going to have dress codes, they should be gender neutral, and they should be absent of race-based policies. So policies about hairstyle, policies about dress, and this is generally not the case. They are generally gendered, they're generally sexist and racist. So I think we just should get rid of them, but if we're not going to get rid of them, we need to greatly change them. We need Title IX coordinators in every school and training for all adults about sexual harassment. And we need to be providing trauma-informed, culturally responsive mental health services in schools. We need to support girls who are experiencing sexual harassment and other forms of trauma appropriately. We just need better mental health support in schools for so many different things, but including experiences of sexual harassment. Next slide, please. So this was really like a data snapshot. We have a ton more information. We have a lot of really great qualitative information, but I wanted to just get you all a sense of the kinds of things that the girls are experiencing. Feel free to email me if you want to know more. We have a paper that's under review that will hopefully come out later this year. But I'm happy to continue the conversation about what we're seeing in our area.
Thank you, Brittany. Aja and Emmanazia, do you all have any questions, thoughts, things that you want to share? We want to take a few minutes to, you know, acknowledge you all. And is your hand up, Aja?
Oh no, I'm just stretching.
Okay.
But also, like, I think, yeah, Dr. Brittany, I thought like the suggestions about moving forward were like pretty spot on. In a way, yes, like we do need more Title IX coordinators, and we do need a more neutral, gender-based like dress code. Cause like it's ridiculous. We have some like schools sending students home for wearing ripped jeans, and they only have like one hole in their jeans, and that's bad on the person of color's record, because what if you're trying to get a job and, you know, they get fined for missing so much school? It's just it's a systemic like basis, like, and it can never change. But yeah, thanks for like providing the data and showing everyone like the statistics, because that's people's best like rebuttal in an argument. Where's the statistics at? Where's your sources? So thank you for like sharing that. I really appreciate that.
Can I add something to it? Okay, so like at my school, our dress code policy is extremely strict, and like it's like, okay, you know, like the patch pockets where you can like slide going in and stuff. We can't have those. We have to wear pants that either don't have pockets, or we have to wear like the stitch pockets. Like we can't have like jean pockets, I guess, per se. And for like a certain amount of kids, like we can't really wear certain sweaters and stuff. We can't wear like we can only wear sweaters given to us from school. And if we rip our sweater, we have to buy another one. I mean, the $5, yeah, it's cool, whatever. It's cheap. Sorry. Okay, cool. But still, I want to wear something, something different. I don't want UP logo every time I go and bring out my sweater. I'm not for it. I just feel like, and then also whenever we're in school, there will be guys literally wearing like jean pants or joggers per se, because we can only wear khakis. They said forget the fact that you have periods. We can only wear khakis. So there will be guys that will wear like khaki joggers looking and stuff, and they'll like not get said anything, like nothing will get said to them about it. But then let it be me come in with my jean pants or jean khakis and whatnot. Oh, they're sending me straight to the office to like some teachers will try to let it slide because they don't think it's that serious, but then they're like, all right, listen, you have to go to the office and you have to change your pants. You either change your pants, go home and change your pants, come back, or stay home, or change your pants here, get a pair of pants from here. And at times they don't even have pants for my size. Like I'm just like, oh, it's just a whole bunch of hoopla for no reason.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you.
Yeah, so it ends up being all these considerations that are gendered expectations that our girls have to experience that our boys do not. And I'm using girls very generally in this sense. And I know that Dr. Brinkman has brought up some really good points about how our girls' bodies are being policed. And I can't help, and so have Emmanazia and Aja, of course, as well. And I can't help but to think how that relates to Dr. Jamelia Blake's research around the adultification of Black girls. So adults feel comfortable doing so because they don't see our young girls as girls. They see them as other adults. And I know that's something as far as the historical roots of this issue and policing Black women's bodies that Julie is going to share with us today. So a really quick introduction. Julie Evans is the founder of Silver Moon Strategies. She's a consultant and trainer who knows the prevention of trauma and violence is possible. I hear you, sis. I agree. Silver Moon Strategies partners with businesses, schools, universities, community agencies, and nonprofits to prevent violence and promote healthy relationships in a safer world. Julie is developing a curriculum for the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence to prevent teen dating violence and for Pennsylvania Women Work to encourage entrepreneurship. She served as Director of Prevention Services at Pittsburgh Action Against Rape, PAR, for 18 years, with 4 of those years serving as Interim Director of Victim Response and Prevention Services. So a lifetime advocate. Julie, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. And one of the first things, which is actually, I think, important to think about as we look at this slide, but before we jump in is, and the one step that we can all take, and that I've been re-energized and remotivated and reminded about, thanks to Aja and Emmanazia for sharing their experiences, is the importance of creating safe spaces for our youth. And so that's one thing that we can all do as soon as this webinar is over, is to create the safe spaces, to listen, to believe, and then to help take action and to partner with our young people in doing that. Because, you know, as this slide represents, these are the experiences that our kids are having. This is rape culture, and it starts in our elementary schools, and it is left unchecked, and so it continues. And it not only is left unchecked, I think, unfortunately, often there are situations and individuals who are encouraging harassment and violence to happen within the schools. And, you know, I want to go through just a couple examples, and I want our focus to be on what I have seen in over 20 years of this work as the institution's response. So we have a 3rd grader, let's say, who's shown pornography and is asked to repeat the behavior she sees. Often the response from the school, from the institution, is, well, you know, she's a kid who often seeks the attention of older boys. How can we redirect her behavior? You know, or it's the 2nd grader on the bus who the 7th grader has reached down her pants. And the institution response is, well, she has some behavior issues. She probably initiated the touching. Then it got a little bit out of hand. Can we put her on another bus or move her seat? And same thing with the high school student who's raped in a hallway, the college student raped at a party. You know, why were they in there during the closed period? Why did they go to the party? Why did they wear that? Why did they drink? And so rape culture is all of these things. It's sexual name calling, comments made about girls' bodies, it's the adultification and the sexualization of Black girls, and it's really the absence of a response to that. And we know that this is so prevalent, you know, and I want to really highlight the work of the Black Girls Equity Alliance and Britney for the research, because one of the largest studies done across the country regarding sexual harassment in students in schools did not even look at victimization by race. So that is such an important component as we're going to continue to look at, and it's been left out of much of the research. So when we all look at research and read things, we need to be paying attention to what questions are asked and who's included and who's not. So next slide, please. So I really think we need to root ourselves in intersectionality. And this is a quote up here from Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, a paper that she wrote in response to a 1976 court case, DeGraff and Reed against General Motors, which was filed by 5 Black women. And in this instance, the court was unwilling to examine this simultaneously occurring racial and sex discrimination. So the women were hired, and General Motors did not hire Black women until 1964. And then the early recession came in the early 70s, and so they laid people off according to seniority. So the first people who were all laid off was every Black woman who worked there, which again were only 5. But the court refused to bind those together. And I think it's really important for us to be looking at that intersectionality, to be looking at the complexity of who we are all as individuals. We're not one-dimensional things. Next slide, please. And one thing that can help us do that is a socio-ecological model. That we have to remember we're individuals that are in relationships with others, within communities, and exist and are impacted by the broader society. And so I think this framework is really helpful for us. Next slide, please. And one of the shifts that I've seen in the last 10 years or so with research and prevention of sexual harassment, sexual violence, intimate partner violence is that shift from how could the victim avoid victimization to how can we prevent sexual harassment and violence from happening in the first place. So this perpetration, we need to stop the perpetration. And the questions really started to shift from what's wrong with you? Again, why did you go to the party? What were you wearing? Why were you in that stairwell? Till what did the school or university or community do or not do to prevent or allow or encourage that behavior to happen? And so to identify these acts of sexual harassment and violence and then hold accountable, that's really part of our shifting of the focus and really looking at the dynamic interplay between these levels. Next slide, please. And so I want us to think about some of these societal risk factors for perpetration. So again, this is from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And if we look broadly and say, well, we have social norms that support sexual violence, male superiority, sexual entitlement, and then we apply this same frame and think about perpetration of racism, right? That we've got societal norms that support that violence, white supremacy and entitlement. So we need to be looking at it through this intersectional approach. Next slide, please. I wanted to also mention, because this is, I think, another example of how we can use research as individuals in our own lives. So there was a study that came out, the Adverse Childhood Experiences, years ago. It was the largest scale study of its kind that looked at what was the health impacts of adverse childhood experiences to people. And so they noted these were some of the adverse childhood experiences, and they noted that individuals who experienced those, and the more of those you experienced, the more likely you were to have poor health outcomes, which would probably not surprise us. If you could click again to share for me. Yeah, oh, a couple times, sorry. 2 more. Yep, thank you. Oh, sorry, can we go back? Sorry, oh. We're heading there. But the Philadelphia Project did another study in 2012, and they added these community level indicators, these adverse experiences that one could experience in childhood. So witnessing violence, living in unsafe neighborhoods, experiencing racism and oppression, living in foster care, experiencing bullying. And I think this helps us to change the conversation. And it helps us, again, keep the focus on it's not the individual who has done something wrong or is somehow deficient. It is the interplay of the community and the larger society as well. Next slide, please. And so some of the things that we can think about if we're working towards prevention of sexual harassment and sexual violence and exploitation, or we want to ask these kinds of questions. We want to stop asking the questions to the individual who's experienced the victimization. And we want to be sure in our work that we're taking this intersectional approach to oppression, violence, and trauma. And we really need to be asking ourselves, is there an intersectional approach to the response to and the prevention of oppression, violence, and trauma? Next slide, please. And so as I said, in the very beginning, the importance of creating those safe spaces. The other thing that we have to do is we have to hold ourselves accountable to holding others accountable. And the biggest way we can all start change immediately is first, how are we going to have a conversation and address and talk about the language that somebody is using? How are we going to say to the adult who is sexually objectifying and adultifying the young person, hey, why are you doing this? Here's what I notice you're doing. That's not the child's responsibility. Let's remember, who is the adult in this situation. And we have to practice because those are hard conversations and we don't like to have them. But it's really important. Start doing it with friends that are supportive. Practice saying the words out loud so that when you're in that situation, you can say something, whether that's, whether you're a teacher in that school and you can have a conversation with another teacher or the principal about that, whether it's somebody sexually harassing somebody walking down the street. I think we saw something in the chat a little bit ago about catcalls. So what can we say in the moment to respond to that? And then creating that safe space for the individuals who are experiencing it, right? How are we going to say, I believe you. I believe you and I hear you. What can we do? And ask the person what they think are good next steps. And if we're around other people, so let's say I'm I'm somewhere and my kids are with me and this sexual harassment is occurring. What am I saying to my children about that? Am I saying, that's an example of how we're not to treat other people? Am I modeling for them what to say in response to that? Next slide, please. And so if you could keep clicking as I go. Because it is really through the actions that we are confronting sexual harassment, and that we should be going in and asking to see school policies. We should be asking to see dress code policies. As parents, as community members, we can be doing this, and we need to be holding adults accountable for creating this culture of safety. Everybody plays a role, but we all have to be doing this work together, because this is what we want our schools to look like. We don't want all of the sexual harassment and the violence and the oppression happening there. Next slide, please. And as Britney suggested, research is so important. We need to keep doing the research, asking the questions, making sure everyone's identity is in the room and their experience is part of the research that we're basing and making decisions, that it is participatory, that the individuals are involved, young people are involved in the process. We have to keep it prevention focused and not just response driven. And I won't go into, again, the comprehensive wellness and sexual health curriculum that we're going to talk about, but we have to, we as parents and as adults, we can impact the policies at schools, at organizations. And so it's important for us to speak to that and engage one another. Have a conversation with 3 people when this webinar is over about what this was about. And, hey, the next time one of us sees this, what are we going to say? What are we going to do? Last slide. Because I want, and the reason I'm so happy to be involved with the Black Girls Equity Alliance is I do think they have big vision. Like, this is California, who their vision is big, a sexually respectful and healthy world free from sexual violence. And that's the world I want for myself, for my kids, for all the kids out there. And I believe it's possible if we continue to do this work together. So thank you.
Thank you. Julie, I have to say that the reveal of all of the harmful words falling off the screen to see this like holistic and affirming school is the best thing I've seen all day. So kudos to you. I'm not the hardest person to be kind of like impressed by technology, but that whole thing just has
and yeah, that was wow. So that was great. I like that.
Well, thanks. I can't take credit, but
that is really, really cool. And I also appreciate, Julie, you putting it into like this systemic conversation even further than some of the talking points that we had earlier today. And the one thing that it kept standing out to me was this idea that you don't have to be a man to advance patriarchy or homophobia or sexism. So I'm wondering, just in your years of advocacy and as a direct practitioner, how have you seen women play into these norms, or if you have seen it as it relates to our young people?
Oh, unfortunately, I think I've seen it from people who run organizations to people who lead schools, right? Who are blaming, who are looking through that lens of oppression, sexism, and racism. And then, of course, everything they do is reinforcing that, right? Like who you hire, what interview process you use in a school setting, how you run your, faculty meetings or your teachers meeting, who gets, the pat on the back for doing a great job, and who does nobody talk to anymore. I remember working in one of the high schools doing prevention work, and one of the teachers reported an instance of, it was another teacher at the school who was sexually harassing and sexually assaulting students. That teacher was excluded by every other staff member there. No one would talk to him. They, said terrible things to him. They excluded him from everything. And I think, as you said, that cuts across all genders, all identities. And they said what he did was wrong because he, turned on the other adults. And so I think that this idea of holding one another accountable and having these hard conversations is really, really important. And we need to do that, as you said, not just men, because we're all influenced by this societal and community level, right? And so we can't keep it at the individual level, or we're not going to get the good prevention work done we need to.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Julie. Kathy, any other thoughts before we move on?
No, I just wanted to remind our audience that, you all can put questions in the chat. We're seeing some of the comments, but if there are any questions, please feel free to use the chat to, let us know. Thank you again, Julie.
Thank you.
So if you don't do the work that Julie just mentioned is really important to get rid of some of that internalized oppression that we might be holding, then we got somebody for you to see, because when Sue pulls up, she will do the work of holding you accountable. So our next speaker is Susan Frietsche. She's a senior staff attorney for the Women's Law Project, where she directs the organization's Western Pennsylvania program. The Women's Law Project is an independent, Pennsylvania-based nonprofit founded in 1974 to end sex and gender discrimination and advance social justice. A central focus of its work today is the intersection of race and gender. The Law Project provides free, confidential legal services, public education, and public policy advocacy, targeting its resources to underserved communities. So Sue, welcome.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, wonderful, because I was having some kind of problem with my internet earlier today. So just wave if you have problems with that. And how are we doing on time?
So we're getting there. If you can, we got about 15, 20 minutes or so.
Okay. So I definitely do not want to eat into Shiwali's time, because I really want to hear what she has to say about the rules taking effect tomorrow in this area. And I also certainly don't want to eat into the time for discussion. So in the period that I have, I think what I will do is just sort of give a general overview about the main legal protection that exists against sexual harassment in schools, and also take a look at some of the barriers to exercising that protection. So there was a nice introduction just now about the Women's Law Project. The one thing I want to emphasize from that is that all of our legal services are free and confidential. One of the main reasons why people do not seek legal assistance is because they think they are going to have to pay for it, and they can't. Or they think that calling a lawyer means that tomorrow you're going to be standing in front of a judge, and you're not sure that that's something that you want to do ever, and certainly not without a great deal of thought and preparation. Those things will not happen if you come to the Women's Law Project, so we encourage people to do that. So could you have the next slide, please? So probably the most powerful law that protects us from sexual harassment and other forms of sex discrimination in education is Title IX. And here it is, simple. No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Now that's any amount of federal financial assistance. Most schools do receive some in some form, and actually, unless they affirmatively try not to, they are probably going to be subject to Title IX and Title IX's mandate not to engage in sex discrimination. Auja's very powerful story drove home how effective a weapon sexual harassment can be in driving people out of education, or in making it impossible for them to really succeed in life if they stay in school. So here, Title IX, the most well-known, arguably the most powerful law, was enacted in 1972. There are state-level laws as well, such as the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. There are local ordinances that protect against sexual harassment, including the Pittsburgh Fair Practices Ordinance. But the most powerful is Title IX. And I guess because it's the most powerful, it is also very much under attack, which you'll hear more about from Shiwali in a moment. So sexual harassment is unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature. Many different forms it can take, ranging from actual sexual assault to pervasive sexual comments, jokes, verbal or nonverbal conduct. There is no end to the different forms that it can take. And it's a form of sex discrimination because of the way it pushes people out of school. It applies to LGBT people. And this is really important. I was really kind of surprised to see Dr. Brinkman's research showing that over 40% of the students she surveyed do not self-identify as heterosexual. So the application of our anti-discrimination laws to LGBT people was always important, but especially when it's that big a part of the population, it's critically important. And I have some good news on that front, which you may already know. The US Supreme Court in June issued a tremendous ruling in a case called Bostock versus Clayton County. This was not a Title IX case. It was not an education case. It was about sex discrimination in employment involving LGBT victims. And what the Supreme Court did, somewhat unexpectedly, but in a very welcome way, was to interpret the term sex in Title VII to include sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. And what that means is that if your boss fires you because he doesn't like gay people and he thinks you're gay, you could have a claim under Title VII. Title VII is very often interpreted in the same ways that Title IX is interpreted. And already courts are starting to use the Bostock case to interpret Title IX in a way that is really expansive to include discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity and gender expression. And this is great. Really very welcome and long overdue. On the state level, Pennsylvania has not succeeded in passing the State Fairness Act, which would specifically and explicitly add sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression to our state anti-discrimination law, the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. Why that is a matter of politics. On my list for reforms that we need to see is a big push to pass the Fairness Act and to finally include LGBT rights in our foundational state anti-discrimination law. So let's go on to the next slide. Thank you. And I see that I set this up so it pops up. So just keep popping up these little windows. Thank you. Okay, that's good. So as you can see from these statistics, and these statistics by now are a couple of years old, but not too much has changed, I'm afraid. You can see that sexual harassment and sexual violence in schools is really pervasive. Nearly 1 in 3 girls ages 14 to 18 have reported surviving sexual violence. And not surprising to anyone on this call, I'm sure, you can see how very, very extensive and pervasive it is among girls of color, pregnant and parenting girls, students with disabilities, and LGBTQ students. Very, very pervasive. Next slide, please. So Title IX requires schools to stop sexual harassment when they learn about it, to prevent it from recurring, and from remedying the effects of it on its victim. Under President Obama, there was pretty robust protection there. and lots of opportunity to dig deep into the culture of a school and change the conditions there for students, as well as help the individual student who complained. Under the Trump administration and Education Secretary DeVos, that progress has been rolled back in a tragic way. Tomorrow, there are new rules taking effect applying Title IX, which Shiwali will explain in some detail. They are far less protective of students' rights than the previous version. The reason I have a retaliation slide up here is because this is the #1 reason someone would call the Women's Law Project to complain about sexual harassment in school. We don't often get complaints from students about the actual sexual harassing conduct. What we get complaints about, and when they finally do turn for legal assistance, it's because of action the school is taking, not action their abuser is taking or the perpetrator is taking. So they come to us at the point where the school is blaming them for the conduct. This is so profoundly unjust and so insidious because it stops students from interrupting this very hostile culture that we find in many schools. We've had clients who were punished because they reported sexual assault, who were actually expelled from school for reporting it. And the way that works is they report to the police and they report to their school. The police determine that they do not wish to pursue, or the district attorney does not wish to pursue prosecution. And at the point at which the criminal justice system drops its interest in the case, the school concludes erroneously that there's no basis for the report and that the student was lying. And that's where retaliation often will kick in. Retaliating against a student for making a good faith report of a Title IX violation like sexual harassment is itself a violation of Title IX and is separately actionable and should never, never, never happen, even though it does very often. Would you give me the next slide, please? Like a broken record, you will see that it is very common for LGBTQ students, students of color, and students with disabilities to face more and worse retaliation from schools than other students. I think I might have a couple of other little points there. Do I? Yes. Yes. And what plays out in these retaliation scenarios is a whole lot of race and sex and gender stereotypes and anti-disability stereotypes as well. You see girls of color who report harassment being called angry, which would appear to me to be completely reasonable response, but being blamed for reporting. You see students with disabilities being disbelieved, being blamed as well, and LGBTQ students, the stereotype there is sometimes, oh, they're doing this just to get attention. Really, you know, very, very destructive. Next slide, please. So this is my contact information. The Law Project is all working from home throughout COVID. I hope that you will refer people to us if they are having problems with sexual harassment, just whether people are back at school in person or not. There is tons of sexual harassment happening through electronic media, and that matters as well, though it will be somewhat harder to remedy with the change in rules. We have a project called Me Too PA funded by the Heinz Endowments and the FISA Foundation. And we hope that people will put your networks in contact with us so we can help think through and remedy some of this completely unacceptable conduct. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sue. And I also know we have a question in the chat box. We are going to get to that in just one moment because I wouldn't want to cut Shiwali's presentation short, which will be for about 10 minutes or so. So we'll hold that question. And if other folks have questions, please drop them in the chat box or the Q&A box. One of the things that I really appreciate about Sue's presentation is that you really hit home that intersectional approach and analysis that's necessary that Julie was talking about in the previous presentation. So thank you for that, because I think we would be remiss in this conversation not to talk about the experiences of our queer and our non-binary and our trans students and how they are often policed because of their bodies and their gender presentation. So thank you, Sue. So next up, we have Shiwali Patel. Shiwali is a senior counsel and director of justice for student survivors at the National Women's Law Center, where she leads federal and state policy development in advocacy, litigation, and education addressing gender-based harassment in schools, including sexual harassment and sexual assault. Previously, she was at the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, where she worked on civil rights policy and legal guidance, interpreting Title IX, that threw me because I was like, wait, what's that Roman numeral? Anti-discrimination protections, including schools' responsibilities in responding to sexual harassment, protections for transgender and non-binary students, again, very important topic, and the rights of girls of color. So thank you, Shiwali. We are turning it over to you.
Great, thank you so much for having me. And as Sue mentioned, I will be spending much of this presentation on the Title IX rule changes that are supposed to go into effect tomorrow. And I just wanted to put in a link in the chat box to our fact sheet that kind of explains what those changes are. That's a helpful resource. Good afternoon, evening, everyone. I just wanted to kind of briefly talk a little bit about the National Women's Law Center for anyone who's not familiar with our organization. NWLC was founded in 1972, which is when Title IX was enacted. And since then, we have worked to protect women and girls' equality and opportunity, including removing barriers in education. And the center is committed to eradicating all forms of sex discrimination in schools, specifically including discrimination against pregnant parenting students, LGBTQ students, and students who are vulnerable to multiple forms of discrimination, such as girls of color and girls with disabilities. And this also includes a deep commitment to preventing and remedying sexual harassment, which is, as we've been talking about today, is a significant barrier to educational success. Could we move to the next slide? Okay, so this is my kind of brief information about what the Title IX rule changes are, but just to let you know, the rule itself with the preamble, which is kind of the department's justification for the changes, are several hundred pages long. So it's a very, very bulky, lengthy, complicated document, which is unfortunate because you know, it shouldn't be something that should be difficult and inaccessible for the public and especially students to be able to understand what's in the rule and what their rights are. So on May 19, 2020, the Department of Education issued changes to Title IX. And as Sue mentioned, Title IX is a critical federal civil rights law that prohibits discrimination based on sex in schools. And it requires that schools respond to sexual harassment as a form of sex discrimination. The rule is supposed to go into effect tomorrow. And when it was first proposed by the Trump administration, almost 2 years ago, it received a lot of attention and a lot of criticism from groups like ours and concern. There were almost 125,000 comments that were submitted from students, from survivors, survivor advocates, trauma specialists, schools, the majority of them opposing these rules, and yet the department has decided to move forward on these extremely flawed and dangerous changes. What the rule would do is it would allow, and in some cases require, schools to ignore many reports of sexual harassment. And in fact, the rule itself explicitly seeks a reduction in the number of Title IX investigations. It's actually the largest cost savings that the department has identified, is that under this rule, schools are going to be responding to less sexual harassment by doing fewer investigations, which really just turns Title IX on its head, right? Because schools should actually be doing more. And as we're learning from today, schools are not doing enough as it is. And so it would do this a few ways. One is that it would require schools to dismiss reports of sexual harassment if the harassment occurred outside of an education program activity. So, you know, this could be at an off-campus party or an event, even if the students went to school together, even if it's by someone who is a teacher, professor, teaches the student survivor. Under the school's Title IX policy, they wouldn't be able to investigate. If it occurs during a study abroad program, they wouldn't be able to investigate. And if it doesn't meet this new narrow definition of sexual harassment. So something that I thought was really important that was highlighted earlier was kind of the broad range of sexual harassment, right? It could include different types of verbal harassment, physical harassment. It could be a visual. There are lots of different types of harassment that students experience. But under this new narrow definition, a lot of harassment, if it's not considered severe and objectively offensive and pervasive enough, and it doesn't deny equal access to a student's education, then a school would not be able to investigate it under their Title IX rules. So that means a lot of these forms of verbal harassment, if it's an isolated incident, maybe it occurred once, or other types of harassment that doesn't meet this kind of high threshold, a school wouldn't be able to investigate it under their Title IX policy, under their Title IX rules. And it would allow schools to dismiss complaints when the respondent is no longer at school, even in the middle of an investigation. So let's say there's a teacher who sexually abused a student and now there's a Title IX investigation. If that teacher retires during the middle of that investigation, or they transfer, they leave, the school can dismiss the complaint without violating Title IX. They're not required to, but they would be allowed to. And for a student who wants to file a complaint with their school, they have to be participating in an education program or activity at the time. This means that they have to be a student. You know, so let's say it's a student who's in college, and I'm thinking of Aja's story, you know, and unfortunately it's not uncommon, at least, you know, in the cases that we've seen and with the survivors and advocates that we worked with, to see this very real issue of school pushout that's resulting from sexual harassment, where in college it's about 1 in 3 student survivors end up being pushed out of school. And so if the complainant or the survivor is no longer a student at the school and they're not planning on re-enrolling or participating in an alumni program, then they're not able to file a complaint, a Title IX complaint. And so even if, you know, their assailant is still a student or still teaching at the school. And so once the student actually meets these thresholds, I guess, the threshold, and kind of checks all the boxes, and the school is now going to open up an investigation, the new rule would require schools to use procedures that treat victims unfairly, holding sexual harassment complaints to much higher and more burdensome standards than any other type of student misconduct. So this means that schools would have to start an investigation with the presumption that no sexual harassment occurred. That's essentially that schools would be required to presume that all students who report sexual harassment are lying. You know, we already know that for particular communities of students, there's already a higher burden when it comes to reporting, and Black girls in particular, where, you know, we talked about this issue of adultification, you know, where adults or school employees won't take their complaint seriously, might minimize it, might blame students for reporting. So this is just going to create an extra burden for students who are more vulnerable to being ignored and pushed out of school. This also includes students with disabilities and LGBTQ students. I know several of the presenters have provided data on like the rate of being kind of the statistic around being punished or blamed or disbelieved. So this is going to have a very significant consequence. Even though this type of presumption is not required, you know, for any other type of misconduct, right? So like sexual harassment is really just one of many things that schools are investigating or responding to. They're also responding to other types of harassment, other types of student misconduct. Maybe it's an assault, or maybe, you know, there's like some other form of verbal harassment that's not sexual, or anything else. And those procedures wouldn't be as burdensome, wouldn't be as unfair to the complainant as this Title IX rule would require only for sexual harassment. And really underlying that is this harmful, you know, myth and stereotype that, you know, individuals who are reporting sexual misconduct are uniquely less credible and therefore have to be subjected to more burdens, right? More scrutiny when they're bringing forward an allegation. And that's part of the basis of our lawsuit, is that it relies on this stereotype. And, you know, we look at statements that Betsy DeVos and other officials have made in this administration, really discrediting survivors to kind of support that. Some schools would also be required to use a more demanding standard of proof for determining responsibility, only for sexual harassment. Again, and then in higher education, survivors and their witnesses would be required to submit to cross-examination directly, orally, and in real time by the respondent's advisor of choice. And there's no limitation on who this advisor of choice could be. So they could be anyone from an angry parent to a fraternity brother to an ex, to someone who is an aggressive criminal defense lawyer. And we know that, you know, sexual harassment is already so underreported that requiring a process like this that could be re-traumatizing is just going to deter, you know, more survivors from participating and reporting at all. And it would create inequities that really, again, just turns Title IX on its head. If you can imagine a scenario where one student has the financial means to be able to afford a high-powered lawyer and the other student doesn't, and yet they both have to be able to cross-examine each other. It would just be unfair, and when the burden should be on the school, you know, rather than putting it on the parties to have to, you know, figure out who has more resources to make the stronger case in their school's process. These are not courtrooms, again. These are schools that have a Title IX mandate to really figure out what happened when they learn about sexual harassment and what steps are necessary to remedy it. And another piece that doesn't get as much attention, but is also quite significant, is that, and this is the fourth bullet on here, is that it would give religious schools a license to discriminate on the basis of sex without notice to students. And so under Title IX, schools that are religious institutions can be exempt from complying with certain provisions. And kind of more recently, this religious exemption has been used by schools to claim that they should be able to discriminate against LGBTQ students, for example, because it goes against their religious text or beliefs. And so this change would allow schools to discriminate without letting students know in advance of their intention to do so. So you could be going to a college and might not know that because you're going to seek an abortion, your school might expel you, and they would be able to do that under Title IX. As a result, there are now 4 lawsuits that have been filed, including by the National Women's Law Center against the Department of Education, hoping to stop the rule. Unfortunately, it is still going into effect tomorrow, but our lawsuits are still pending. We still, you know, believe that we have a very strong case, and they're still moving forward. We have a hearing in our suit on September 2nd for a preliminary injunction to stay the rule. In our lawsuit, we are representing 4 advocacy organizations across the country that directly represent survivors who would be harmed by the rule, and 7 survivors ranging from age 10 to you know, having been graduate students when they were sexually assaulted and harassed, who would be impacted by this rule. Can we go to the next slide, please? I'll go through this quickly because I know we're ending at time. So despite this terrible rule, you know, there are still things that can be done to urge our school districts and our states and colleges and universities to do better by students. And in the rule itself, what's been interesting is that as the Department of Ed has learned that because they're so confusing, there's some clarification that needs to come out of it. Part of it's through litigation, others are through questions that have been raised. They have provided some clarification. So now we know that the Title IX rule, according to a blog that they issued last week, would only apply to sexual harassment that occurs on or after August 14th. So if someone was assaulted a year ago and they report with their school tomorrow or next month or in a year, the school would not have to comply with the Title IX rule. It still raises a lot of questions. There's still confusion there, but they did say that in a blog, and that it doesn't preclude. They also state that schools are not precluded from having a non-Title IX policy to address the sexual harassment that earlier explained would have to be dismissed, right? So if it's like verbal harassment that doesn't meet their narrow definition, or if it occurred at an off-campus party, the department indicated that schools can still investigate and respond under a non-Title IX policy. It just means that you know, if a school doesn't respond, you wouldn't be able to turn to the federal government to enforce your Title IX rights because they're not recognizing it as a Title IX right for schools to respond to all sexual harassment. Other things schools can do is to provide comprehensive sex education. You know, this is critical that, you know, the connection between comprehensive sex education and sexual harassment prevention, especially when it's age appropriate, medically accurate, LGBTQ affirming, and that it addresses sexual abuse and consent and sexual harassment in dating. Schools can also collect climate surveys, which are an important tool for understanding whether or not students actually feel supported and safe in their school community. And effective climate surveys would get at questions about the prevalence of different types of harassment, the impact of the harassment on the students, and you know, whether or not they were met with a punitive response, students' attitudes towards it, and their perceptions of the effectiveness of the school's responses. Schools should also divest from police in schools, you know, and invest more in, you know, counselors and mental health professionals, and ensure that, you know, school districts are responding to sexual harassment separate and apart from any sort of criminal investigation enforcement, because Title IX is a civil rights law. It has nothing to do with the criminal process. And unfortunately, though, we see, especially K-12 schools, that a lot of schools just think when there's a report, we'll just leave it to the police, and they don't think that they're supposed to do something on their own when they are required to and should be. We should also abolish dress codes, and this has been talked about a lot, so I will, in the interest of time, just kind of leave it at that, because they promote rape culture and they deprive students of equal opportunity to learn, and they particularly harm girls of color, especially Black girls. And schools should make it easier to report sexual harassment and provide supportive measures to students in schools. And again, I'm thinking about Aja's story, which again, like, you know, thank you so much for your courage in sharing your story, Aja. And thinking about what you said about how your school didn't provide supportive measures and how critical that could have been to ensuring that you still felt safe and supported at school. And that schools should be doing that, and too often they don't. And that schools are also educating the student community about who their Title IX coordinators are, because it's a very good point that many times we see school employees, much less students, who are aware of their Title IX coordinator, who are actually not aware who the Title IX coordinator is. And so, you know, we bring lawsuits against school districts. We sue them when students have experienced sexual harassment and have then been pushed out. And many times what we've noticed when we question and depose the school administrators is they have no idea who the Title IX coordinator is. Which is very troubling. And so, especially under this new Title IX rule, they're going to have a bigger role in responding to sexual harassment. So schools need to do a much better job in ensuring that everyone knows who that person is. And I think I'm at time, so I will go to the next slide, please. So these are some of our reports. We can just kind of go through them. This is our dress coded report. These were done through participatory action research. These were conducted, the 2 dress coded reports are co-authored by Black girls in DC, kind of about their experiences with dress codes and being discriminated against. And then there's a follow-up about what their schools have done to actually change their policies as a result. And then our next one is a toolkit that we have. We have a letter learned series. This is a few years ago where we came out that talks about stopping school pushout for girls of color. We know that Black girls and Indigenous girls are significantly more likely to be discriminatorily disciplined and pushed out of school. And so we have a toolkit about, you know, to look at the school's policies, whether or not, again, they have strict dress code policies and how they're actually punishing girls of color. And then can I see next one? This is another report that was co-authored by Latina girls on mental health support. And I think that also had come up earlier during the presentation about the need for schools to provide mental health support and resources for students, and to actually listen to students about their mental health challenges. And so this is a We Are Not Invisible report. These are all available on our website, also co-written about by students and focusing on Philadelphia schools, and it makes recommendations as to how schools can provide better mental health support and training for Latina and Latinx students. Next, please. And then lastly, this is a link to our legal network for gender equity. And so the National Women's Law Center houses the Legal Network for Gender Equity and the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund. And so these are critical resources for anyone who's experienced sex discrimination, including sexual harassment. We have a network of attorneys from all over the country. And so we could take an intake if someone is looking for legal help, and then connect them or provide them with the names of 3 attorneys across the country. And then they can reach out to them and to kind of take it from there. So it's a great resource that was developed within the last few years. And I think that's about it for me. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Shiwali. Kathy, I'll turn it over to you if that's okay for a question and answer.
Okay. So yes, thank you so much, Shiwali. That was so informative, and just with these changes, I mean, it's not that we didn't know it was coming down the pike, but I just didn't even realize it was tomorrow that all these changes are going into effect. And so hopefully, you know, you all will get that injunction in the next couple weeks, and then after that, we will see a change in the White House. So then all the changes that have been made will be reversed or whatever. So thank you for that information. And so for those of you listening, please make sure that you write down the contact information, not only about Shiwali and what's being done at the National Women's Law Clinic or Project, to also keep Sue Frietsche and the work that they do here in Allegheny County in Western PA at the forefront, because a lot of times people, you know, need assistance and don't know where to turn, and don't know about these great organizations, and that's what they're there for. As Tashara said, you know, you really don't want Sue to show up and her team to, you know, be filing lawsuits against you, but they will. And so it's, you know, great to have them as a partner. So one of the questions that came up in the chat box was about locally, or do we know of, and it's something that we've been having a conversation about in our health and wellness work group, about are there any school districts that are doing great work in addressing comprehensive sex education or even sexual harassment. And so this conversation about the need for comprehensive sex education has been one that we've been trying to have locally, and to change just how we do things at the school level from K to 12. And it's been a struggle, to be quite honest. And so we're trying to re-engage and continue to have the conversation. But I'm going to throw this out. I know that within the chat box, Britney and Julie responded. And so if you all can give your response about the question, about any programs that you all know locally or nationally, school districts rather, that have been doing great work. And in Shiwali, if you know any that have done a great job in addressing sexual harassment and comprehensive sex education on a larger level across the country, we would like to hear that as well.
Yeah, so I'll just say what I said in the chat box, which is like, we really haven't found locally a district or even a school that we're feeling really is like hitting it out of the ballpark. So if you're like, hey, I think the school's doing really well, please tell us, because I do think it's important to hold up, like when schools are being responsive and when they are engaging in best practices and are listening to youth and responding to that, and to help get other schools to like see, this district's doing it. My sense is locally we're not seeing any superstars, but hopefully I definitely want to hear Sue thinks about that, and some perspective on like nationally if there's
So I feel that I'm the wrong person to answer that question. I too don't know, and this may just be my own ignorance, but I don't know of any superstars. And a horrible lawyer answer here. I feel like I'm not in a position to endorse any particular school because we could get a call tomorrow from someone having a horrible experience there, and I don't want my answer to be used against that person.
And I just sort of echo what Sue said. I think the issue becomes, schools might be doing portions of things well, and we can look at that. But unfortunately, the part that schools tend to do the best are education for students. And that doesn't change the school system or the administration response or the individuals who teach within that school. And, so I think we really have to look and put some pressure on schools there.
And I'd also add, I don't know of a school or a school district to lift up in terms of, being a great model. And I will add that, there could be schools that have really great policies on paper, but that doesn't even mean they're following them. And that's an issue we often see, is that even if it looks great on their website and their manuals, are oftentimes employees aren't even aware of what they're supposed to be doing, what's in the policy, and they're not following it.
So we have a question in the Q&A. Could you elaborate on abolishing of dress code in schools? What are pros and cons?
So I guess I'll get started. I know this was a topic that come up in all of our presentations, but so for us, it's kind of tying in a lot of what has been said about how dress codes promote rape culture, and they send this message that girls are responsible for not distracting boys and that they're the cause of sexual harassment because of what they wear, which kind of leads to victim blaming, and which is very concerning and problematic. And so, and they also deprive students of equal opportunities to learn, which is something that we've heard throughout the webinar, is how students have been suspended, whether it's in-school suspension or out-of-school suspension. Regardless, they're deprived of educational opportunity simply because of the way they're dressed, and how they also rely on sex and race stereotypes, and they're enforced in a discriminatory manner due to gender, transgender status as well, race, color, and size. And so, there are a lot of reasons that, we think dress codes are quite problematic. I hope that the reports we have, and I can drop in a link if that would help, would kind of provide kind of more narratives and stories from students themselves who've been subjected to them and their experiences and the harms as a result, which I'm happy to drop in.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think one thing I've noticed in talking to parents and teachers and other school employees about dress codes is that oftentimes people think that they're positive, or that they're coming from a well-intentioned place, or they think they're teaching students how to be professional, and so like people don't realize often how problematic they are, and that they are enforced in really harmful and discriminatory ways, and that they are I don't think it's like subtle, the sexualization of the dress codes, but the people, adults in the system, don't always realize at first how much it's reinforcing that. So I think sometimes it takes a minute to sort of think through, wait a second, what would it look like if we weren't measuring girls' bodies and telling them they can't go to school, right? Like, I think we have to sort of, this sort of like acceptance of that, of like judging people based on their bodies and around race is like so pervasive that sometimes people don't always see. So I think like stepping back and thinking it through. I don't think, I mean, the research shows there's nothing positive about having dress codes. People think that they're going to be good, but they aren't in practice. So, but I think it's helpful to like recognize, even if people think they have good intentions for having a dress code, the intention does not actually match the impact. And so I think abolishing them is the best way to go.
Also, like building back up what Dr. Britney probably said. Also, like, I've been in a public school my entire life for like the past like 12 years. It's all been public schools. And I know in elementary school, we had to wear uniforms, khaki pants, white shirt, navy blue shirt, you get the whole thing. In some families, most public schools are like built in low income or like poverty stricken neighborhoods. And some families can't afford to pay $5 of each shirt every school year. And people have kids, so imagine like how much money that would put that are like putting into like getting new uniforms every year when we already have clothes of our own. So I just think like schools don't have that consideration. If we can't buy uniforms for our kids, who's going to get them for us? That's why like dress code, I feel like dress code is unnecessary. I feel like schools are like policing a certain agenda, like not an agenda, but you're just desensitizing our children. I feel like they take creativity out of like our children's like everyday lives with just policing them in these khaki pants, white shirt, and whatnot. Even with the khaki pants and white shirt build-ups, girls still get sexualized every day public school. So the uniform thing don't work. What else can we do? And there's always excuses. There's always excuses built upon excuses for each administration council. So honestly, I feel like dress codes aren't really necessary in our like everyday life. And it's a very like radical idea, but maybe like that idea needs to be pushed forward. So that's just my input on that.
Thanks for sharing that, Aja. Thank you. So there was some conversation, and I think some of this, there was some answers that was said verbally, and then some responses in the chat about just parent participation and experience and what their input has been. And so some of you have addressed that. We only have a few minutes left, and so I just wanted to thank everybody for being on this. I think you all did a fabulous job and gave us a lot to think about and potentially looking at next steps. Is there anything else that you all want to share that you feel that the audience and everyone needs to know? No?
Just keep listening to Black girls. I think that's the thing, right? Like, this is all of the work that we've been doing is because we heard Black girls tell us this is what's going on in our school. This is how we're being treated. This is how adults are not supporting us and responding to us. So I think making sure that you keep listening to, believing, and supporting Black girls.
Thank you. Thank you, Brittany, for that. And so we're going to close with that comment. And I want to remind everyone that we have our last webinar that's coming up. And it is on September 10th. And it is entitled She Matters, Black Girls and Gender-Based Violence. And so it is this conversation that's taken another step forward in just talking about, you know, the adultification of Black girls and issues that they face. And when we're talking about sex trafficking and just how our girls fall prey to some of the elements that are in our communities and in our families. And so look forward to having that conversation, and then to also uplift our summit that is coming up on September 24th and 25th. And on September 24th, our keynote will be Centoya Brown-Long, who herself was a victim and a survivor of sex trafficking. So looking forward to taking a deeper dive into how we can, first of all, have these conversations, because what happens is we're not talking about it as if it's not happening, and then people don't know when it does happen where to turn to for support. So not only do we, and a lot of attention gets put on intervention, but let's talk about prevention. How can we start to have these conversations early on before anyone experiences the harm that is done? And so how can we change the culture, right? And so continue to have these conversations is hopefully going to lead to that. So again, thank you everyone that participated in this webinar. Thank you for those that have been watching and sharing in the chat box. Please be looking out for additional information about our upcoming events that'll be happening in September. In Pittsburgh and in Allegheny County, September is Black Girls at Equity Month. And so we will be uplifting Black girls all month long, but also talking about some of these issues that are systemically impacting our girls as well. So any other thoughts, co-hosts? Where's Tashara? Anything else?
No, just that I think today's conversation was great. I really appreciate the way everyone's knowledge and experience and feedback fed off of each other's. And so this was dynamic. You all, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. So we are right at 5:01. So thank you, everybody. So we will see you next month on the 10th for She Matters. So the same link that you use to access it and register for this webinar on our website, you can go under gwensgirls.org and then events, and then there's the link that will be for the next webinar. So please register today for that. So good night, everybody. See you next time.